Hello, Melanie here, the admin half of John Horsey Horticulture. In this video, I've put together 4 videos from our Wildflower Meadow playlist, just so that it's easy for you to access. You don't have to click in and out of our channel to find the other bits. The first 3 segments of the video are about the perennial wildflower meadow that John created, and the last bit is about an annual wildflower meadow that John also created, 2 very different things. We have a little patch of lawn in our front garden, that's what we've used. This video is all about creating that little bit of paradise for your insects and your pollinators in your own garden. It's not about bringing in diggers and creating acreage, it's about what you can do in your own piece of heaven. Welcome to John Horsey Horticulture. John's been teaching horticulture professionally for over 30 years now, and on this channel we're hoping to help you develop your gardening skills. Whether you're new to gardening and would like some advice on propagation, how to build a wildlife pond, how to sow vegetables, or whether you're a seasoned horty who could always use some extra advice and some tips. If you like learning those things, do consider following us. That's push the subscribe button, there's no charge. And don't forget to push the all-important notification bell. That lets you know every time we upload a new video.
Today we're going to have a look at creating a wildflower meadow. This is a mixture of, it's a perennial grasses and perennial flowers all living together, and they are a permanent feature, they're not just a temporary thing. Okay, so originally most meadows would have been wildflower meadows. There would have been this balance between the finer grasses and the wildflowers, and of course it's part of childhood memories. Of course we all had wildflower meadows. With the passing of the war, of course, then we got these artificial fertilizers and the development of tougher ryegrasses, and the poor old wildflowers and the fine grasses just died out. They couldn't compete with it, and any which did survive the competition were killed by the selective herbicides which were developed for them. So consequently we don't have many natural wildflower meadows today. The ones we do have are hopefully nature reserves and protected, but we can all do our own little bit to help get these going, and in the same way give a home to the wildflowers, the insects, the butterflies, the bees, the grasshoppers and other wildlife which live in them. So scale will depend on what you've got. If I had 5 acres I could do a lovely meadow, but I've just got this little plot and I'm going to use this to create my own wildflower meadow. I started off by leaving it in the spring and seeing what would happen. Sometimes you've got dormant seed, it may just come back, but this is quite fertile soil. It's full of ryegrasses, and unfortunately it just came up and it was a bit of a mess. A few dandelions pulled through, but it was long grass. There were very few flowers. So I'm going to have to intervene, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the top 3 inches of the soil. That way I can reduce the old grass roots, I can take away hopefully any seeds which are on the top there, and I should get down to a finer, poorer soil which will suit the fine grasses and the flowers I'm going to grow. So that's my next job. I've got to take that off. And we can then start sowing. We'll be putting some fine grass seed down, things like sweet vernal grass and some of the bents, the very fine, very pretty grasses, very pretty flowering grasses. We'll be putting in some wildflowers, and I shall be sowing some seeds and also planting some plants. But until I've got this top, I can't do much about that. So if you'll leave me to get on with my digging, I'm going to have to go with this and take the topsoil off. And we'll come back and see how I get on when we finish the digging. Right, hello again. You can see that I've taken out 2 of the little beds that I want to use to start my wildflower meadow. The idea being, as you remember, was to take the top turf off. That will take away all the ryegrass, all the vigorous grass, and hopefully then when we sow the finer grasses later on, they'll be okay. But what I've noticed as I'm going along is that actually as I dig the turf off, and as hard as I'm trying, the seed is falling in, and if you look closely down on the patch there, you will see that there's the seed of the ryegrass. And of course, if I leave that to germinate with the fine grasses, it'll smother it out. So what I'm going to have to do is to have a false germination. So looking at these plots which I have here, bearing in mind that it's still quite warm, we're still end of September, the ground will be warm, I'm going to water this now and try and get all that seed which has fallen through to germinate. And then I can hoe that off and immediately sow the fine seed afterwards. So that's the plan now. I'm going to just put that down, get my hose pipe, and if Juno will keep out the way, I'm going to water these beds. So just a question of damping it down. If you had a rain shower, you'll be fine. But I just want to get this so that all the seed on the surface will germinate. And lawns do germinate very, very well at this time of the year. It's the best time to sow a lawn if you want a lawn going, because the ground's still warm and the birds aren't feeding their babies or anything. All it needs is just a little bit of water to get the seed germinated. So here's the second bed, and what I'm just going to do, it doesn't need, I mean, actually it's quite moist down below. It's just the surface has dried out with the wind we've had over the last few days. So I'm going to just moisten that, and hopefully that'll be sufficient to germinate all those ryegrass seeds, and then I can get rid of those and sow my finer grasses later on. So it's not a question of soaking the ground, it's just a question of moistening the top, moistening the seed, and moistening the soil on which it will be resting, and then that will, along with the heat, that will stimulate germination, and we'll be able to get rid of the ryegrass. You can see a certain little dog's been digging here. There we are. So now we'll wait and see, and hopefully, and normally grass comes out fairly quickly. I've known it come up in about 3 or 4 days at this time of the year. So hopefully it'll be up very quickly, then we can get on and destroy it and then sow the fine seeds. Now before I sow it, I'm going to put some bulbs in. The bulbs will be quite deep so that they'll be right down there, and the sowing on top of them shouldn't affect them at all. But I've got to put them in now, and I've actually gone for 3 different sorts of bulbous plants. The first ones are Camasias. These are the quite big bulbs, and some of them are actually starting to send out their roots already, so it's time they got in. So I'm going to put those in. We're also going to have some of these little daffodils, which are very, very similar to the wild daffodils, Wilma they're called, and then around them all we'll have some little alliums, these tiny little bulbs, which will go in as well. Now obviously I want them all to go together. I'm going to try and get the taller ones at the back a bit and ease it on down. So I'll be putting the Camasias in first. And the way we naturalise bulbs is to gently drop them on the ground and let them land. If you do like that, and then you can put them where they land, it will look very natural, far more natural than if you try to space them out. So I'm just scattering them, and they'll go in exactly where they fell. So I'm putting those towards the back, when the front won't hurt. Then I'm going to bring the daffodils through, and they'll be going, again, I'll let them interact a bit. Wherever they fall doesn't really matter, because that'll look rather natural. So in go the daffodils. There we are, just scatter them around, and we can put some, the alliums then are coming in with them, and I'll put the alliums really more up the front here, where they're smaller. An odd daffodil won't hurt at all, and then we've got them really quite nicely scattered around. And hopefully they will look rather nice coming up through the grass when we're finished. So there we are, I've scattered them around a bit, even a bit back there. Now I've just got to plant them. The Camasias have to go in quite deep. They've got to go in about 4 inches. Daffodils not quite so much, but it's much better to put them in deeper than too shallow. When we come to planting bulbs, the traditional way, of course, is with a trowel, and often the trowel will have a marking on you, so you know how deep in the soil to go. But now we have these bulb planters. which again, they've got the depth, unfortunately that's in centimetres, which is not really ideal, but this older one has got them in inches, which is another way of doing it. We'll need to get this one 4 inches for the Camasias. So let's make a hole here and get this Camasia in. Take it away. There's the hub position we had it in. Work my way down a bit. Much easier than using a spade, this is, isn't it? That's quite nice and deep. There it comes out. In goes the Camasia, nice depth down there. And then we just push this one. Actually, get the plug out. There we are, plug comes out. And that goes back on there. The daffodils don't need to be quite so deep. Probably about 3 times their depth. So I'm going to just use this one and see whether we can get it. But all these stones, it's not so easy. The good thing is the stones give you the drainage which bulbs want. There we are, we're working our way in there. I can get down to my required depth. I can shove the bulb in down there, and I can just twig that one and it all falls out again. So that's pretty good, isn't it? So that's a daffodil. Let's show you how to do a little allium. These are much smaller. In fact, those two have landed together, so they're going to go in the same hole. So we'll take those out there. Find them. Down we go again. There we are. Nice depth. Lift that out. Oh, it's all fallen in. All right. We've got the depth again there. Put those two. Separate them up. There we are. Done. And now I've just got to work my way around and plant the whole lot. I've been to our local supplier, a chap called Julian down at Goran Farm. Very, very helpful. And I've got a whole selection of different grasses to sow. Well, grasses and plants. The thing with wildflower meadows is to make sure that you don't put in ryegrass. You want the softer grasses, the ones that the plants will be able to live with, not be smothered by. So what I've got there, first of all, is 2 of my very favourite grasses. One is called the bent grass, so there you are, bent grass, and it's a very low growing with a very, very attractive seed head. And I'm just going to make a little mixture of that in this tin. So I've put a little bit in there. I think that's probably enough, because we've got quite a lot of seeds. They're not massive areas, and we've got quite a bit to do, so that should be enough for that one. The other one I'm going to put in is sweet vernal grass. This is the one that comes up. It has got a sweet taste. That's why people tended to chew it back in the old days. And I'm going to put some of that in as well. So that'll go in the mixture. We'll mix it all up in a minute. And I've got also some yellow. Oh, well, yellow rattle's gone everywhere now. Some yellow rattle, which is a really lovely lovely plant, which is our semi-parasitic on grass. So it does tend to keep the grasses a bit low and helps the wildflowers get going. So we'll put a fairly good mixture of that in. We've now got some. Use that as well. Agrimony. Just got a mixture of stuff that I really like, and we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to put too much of that in because. A little goes a long way, shall we say. Musk mallow, that's a nice one. That was nice for later on, so a little bit of that goes in. There we are. The beauty of all this is it's all very, very haphazard. We'll see how it comes up. It'll come up in various places and all the rest. So we'll see. Cat's here, that's rather nice. Mix some of that in. A little bit more. It's a bit like making a cake, isn't it? And then grass fetchling, that's a little yellow pea-like flower. We'll put a bit of that in. And common mallow, that's a bit like our mallows that we grow in the garden, really. But there you are, mix that in. Later flowering, that's really quite good. And last but not least, some cowslips. And so they look lovely growing in wildflower meadow. I'm going to put quite a bit of that in and hope we get plenty up. There we are, that's the cowslip. Right, now, let's just put that bit of seed there in it. And now I need to mix it all up. You haven't got the lid to be able to shake it all about, but that should be mixing it quite nicely. let's say it'll come through hopefully quite haphazard, and we should get a nice mixture. Now let's go over and have a look at getting it sown. I'm just going to take a handful, and I'm going to go very, very lightly to start with. So I'll scatter this very, very lightly. I've got about a quarter of the seeds, so I'm going to go over that quarter bed there. Always do it nice and thin. You can always come back and put more on afterwards. So there we are, up to that corner there. As you go along, you'll see how much you've got left, and make sure you've got sufficient. As I say, if in doubt, be very, be sparing to start with. You see, I've actually got a little bit left, so that means I can go and put a little bit more. Maybe on that area there where I didn't put so much to start with. Don't worry if it's not even, because these plants will grow at different rates. You'll find that some of the wildflowers are going to grow much bigger than each other, and so they'll sort themselves out. It'll take quite a while to happen, but eventually they'll sort themselves out. So if you were doing a lawn, you'd be measuring this out, and you'd be putting on like a gram per square metre. But in this case, because it's all different types of grass and different plants, we've got rather a mix there, which should be fine. And some of these seeds need to be exposed to germinate, and some need to be covered. So what I'm going to do is just give a gentle raking, so that hopefully we'll cover all requirements. There we are. We just have to wait now for the spring and see what comes up. If we can keep a little dog off. There we are. So that's all done. Now just wait and see what happens. We're still working on these plots. We talked about the wildflower meadows, but now we're going to look at something completely different. This is an annual meadow. So whereas the wildflower meadow is a long-term permanent, very more permanent the better, the annual meadow is actually cultivated, and it's sown every year, literally annually. And it's for plants which would grow in a cornfield, which were annually sown. Things like corn marigold, poppies, cornflower, and all those sort of native species. So we've chopped over this piece of land, we've got it ready to go. Now I'm going to just go and break it down a little bit more before we start sowing the seed on it. So I'm just going to go along now and gradually tidy it up. Try to get more of a tilth. You've got seeds to sow, and seeds need to germinate. Of course, a lot of the weeds have dug up to come through as well. But just break that down, break all these lumps down, to try and get it into as fine a tilth as possible. There we are. That's coming down nicely. You can see the difference, can't you, in the actual tilth of the soil, as we call it. And on a day like today, it actually dries out very, very quickly. Don't be afraid to actually thump the soil as well. If it looks a bit lumpy, break it down with the rake. Get those lumps down into crumbs. And there we are, ready to go. Let's go and have a look at the plants we're going to be planting. Right, here we are. Now we're going to mix the seeds up, ready to go. Now, as I said before, forget all about wildflower meadows. This is an annual meadow, and it's flowers which are going to flower. We're going to sow them now. They're going to germinate, hopefully, very quickly, and they're going to be flowering this first year, and we're going to have a lovely spring display. I suppose the first thing we think about with annual meadows are things like cornflower. So I've got cornflower here. What I'm going to do is mix it all up in this jam jar, and then sow it as a mixture. So I'm not quite sure how much we're going to need for it all. Let's try a good amount, I think, just so we've got plenty. So that's the cornflower. That's cornflower blue. I'm sure you're all familiar with that one. Lovely flower. Along with that, I'm going to put poppies. We all know poppies, papaver, and these seeds are going to be much smaller, of course. And these are the hardy annual red poppies. And I'm going to just open that up. I think I'm going to put them all in because they're much smaller, and they'll mix in better. Yeah, they're tiny compared to those, so look at the size of those. That's what you'd expect. So let's put all those in. That's So that's the cornflower, there's the red poppy. Then we'll have the yellow corn marigold, calendula. This is daisy mix. I don't know whether it's quite the wild one, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So we'll try that one as well. Yeah, those are much bigger. So we'll pop those in. That's your yellow. Well, they've all gone in anyway, so that solves that problem. I try to use seeds who are supportive of conservation issues, and Mr. Fothergills here are supporting the RSPB, and I've been an RSPB member for years and years and years, and so they're very, very good conservation body who've been buying up land and protecting birds. I think I joined in '73, so they've been going quite a while. So, but in this case, what I'm putting in is something a little bit different. It's the Echium vulgare, yeah, and that's another blue. And I've never tried it before in an annual meadow, so I thought, well, we don't know unless you try, do you? So we'll put those in as well. Looks about equal mix at the rate I'm going, so that's very good. And then the last one is the corn cockle, agrostemma. These are all from Goran Farm, Julian at Goran Farm. And this is a pink thing, a star-like flower. We'll show you a picture, I'm sure. And we'll just try this as a bit of again an experiment to see how it does. So mix a bit of that in with it. That's a bit more. Just trying to get about equal amounts of each one. All in the jar now. I'm mixing it all up, and I'm going to sow that out onto the plots we prepared just now. All mixed up and ready to go. So what I'm going to do with this is actually break it into two halves, because so many times you sort of start one end and you put it on what you think is about right, nice even coverage, get to the other end and you've got either too much or you've got not enough. So I'm going to start this end and just gently scatter it over the whole area. And you can't see the black very well, but I think you can see the white seeds showing up quite well, and that's a pretty good coverage we've got there. You can, if you think each one of those little seeds could be a plant, then that's going to cover this area really quite nicely. We'll get rid of the footprints in a minute when we rake it over. So try to cover the areas really which you haven't covered. It's the best way to do it. Areas which look a bit thin, just put a bit more on, and scatter it throughout. Now I'll just get the rake and cover that over. Okay, so I'm just going over now with the rake to try and cover as much of it as I can, just gently. Just going to go over now and just firm it down a little bit. I often say it's a good idea to firm it down. On a plot this size it's quite easy, of course. The lovely thing is now, it's a bit late putting it in, but the weather's been so cold and so dry, I think it doesn't do any harm to wait now. And now it's warm, moist, and hopefully we shouldn't get any more frosts. There we are. Now we leave it to nature to germinate and grow away.
Well, we do hope that was helpful. It really is very easy, just a little patch of your garden you can turn into a beautiful wildlife haven. Thanks so much for joining us here in Somerset. We've really enjoyed having you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.